Hey, good evening and welcome to Freedom Speech and You. I am your host, Ken. I'm running solo tonight. Andrea is in the chat room tonight. She is busy with other things, so she cannot be on as our co host tonight. We are expected to have Liberal Dan on by 8 p.m. tonight in Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. And so we are waiting for that. In the meantime, we will be discussing the topics of the day. So good to have Andrea in chat and Aaron in chat and our moderator in chat. So um, let's get started with our topic for the day. So our topic for the day is the Democrats passing the major climate and health bill. And so that's something that happened. And is in today's news. So let me get the mouse clicks on here. So what's in that bill that our president has sponsored? So I will read along with you. Oops. Yep. Okay, it's good. Senate Democrats, after weeks of negotiations to revive the core of their election year agenda, passed a spending bill which would attempt to tackle climate change, the high cost of prescription drugs, and lower the deficit by roughly $300 billion. Late Saturday night into Sunday morning, senators voted on amendments to major spending bill that tackles healthcare, climate, and taxes. And this was sponsored by the Democrats. The legislation was passed through the budget reconciliation process, which means all 50 Democrats and one tiebreaker vote from Vice President Harris were needed, since none of the 50 Republican senators voted for this bill. Note that none of the Republicans voted for this bill. Don't let them take credit for it. It also restricts the measures in the bill to those that directly change federal spending and revenue. Majority Leader Schumer said Saturday that despite a few cuts from the Senate parliamentarian, the overall bill is still a legislative win for Democrats. It's been a long, tough, winding road, said Schumer, before the final vote Sunday. And of course, we have the ads creeping in. Democrats have argued the measure will tackle voters' main economic concern, naming it the Inflation Reduction Act. Republicans argue the new spending bill will aggravate inflation. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says, though, the bill has negligible effect on inflation in this year and into next year. Overall, the bill is a very scaled down solution to what many Democrats, including the president, had asked for originally. Quote, "This bill is far from perfect. It's a compromise. But it's often how progress is made," said Biden to the White House last month. Quote, "My message to Congress is this. This is the strongest bill that you can pass." Okay, hang on one second while I check because there are messages coming in Discord. Okay, so that's just the stream, and we have okay, so we have our guest Dan asking for the link for others to watch. So hang on while I get him that. And so apologies if pulling this link causes undue stress on the stream, so hang on. And I cannot see you, so chat amongst yourselves. Okay, so hang on. Okay, is that the live stream? Yes, this is the live stream. So that's the live stream link. Okay. All right, I'm back to the live stream. Aaron asks, are bills, are compromises? Yes, all bills are compromises in some respect. That's typical of what happens in the government. So Dan is going to come on at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Okay, as I was reading, apologies if I'm repeating. My message to Congress is this, said the president. This is the strongest bill you can pass. End quote. After passage in the Senate, the House plans to take up the bill at the end of the week and send it to President Biden for his signature. So these are the things that are in the bill. It tackles climate change, spending more than $300 billion, and that would be invested in energy and climate reform. It's the largest federal clean energy investment in U.S. history. The bill has support from many environmental and climate activists, but is short of the $555 billion that the Democrats originally called for. Excuse me. This portion of the bill takes on transportation and electricity generation and also includes $60 billion for growing renewable energy infrastructure and manufacturing like solar panels and wind turbines. It includes several tax credits for individuals on things like electric vehicles and making homes more energy efficient. It would also lower greenhouse gas emissions by 40% based on 2005 levels. Do this by the end of the decade, which is a little bit short of the 50% Biden had originally aimed for. Jesse Jenkins from Princeton University had the following to say, quote, "It puts us within a close enough distance that further executive action, state and local government efforts, and private sector leadership could possibly get us across the finish line by 2030. Mr. Jenkins, or Ms. Jenkins, I'm not sure because Jesse could possibly be one or the other, leads the REPEAT project analyzing the impact of government climate actions." One of the next things the bill does is it lowers the cost of prescription drugs, making those more affordable. But it does have limitations. It includes a historic measure which allows the federal health secretary to negotiate the prices of certain expensive drugs each year for Medicare. But this won't impact every prescription drug or every patient, and it won't take effect quickly. The negotiations will take effect for 10 drugs covered by Medicare by the year 2026, increasing to 20 drugs in 2029. The portion of the bill that tried to cap at $35 per month the price of insulin, a drug that's incredibly expensive in the US compared to other countries, was ruled out by order of the Senate parliamentarian. Thank you for letting Benny Loco know, Andrea. The parliamentarian ruled the cap would apply on Medicare, a government program, but not on private insurance. So Democrats split the measure between Medicare and private insurance, but the Republicans ultimately blocked the measure for private insurance. The parliamentarian also ruled that a measure that was in the bill to force drug companies to offer rebates if prescription prices outpaced inflation was not totally in line with the rules for budget reconciliation. She said it could apply to Medicare patients, but not those with private insurers. The bill puts a cap of $2,000 on out-of-pocket prescription drug costs for people on Medicare effective in 2025. There's a 3-year extension on healthcare subsidies subsidies, in the Affordable Care Act, originally passed in the pandemic relief bill last year, estimated by the government to have kept premiums to $10 a month or lower for the vast majority of people covered through federal health insurance exchange. That helps millions of Americans avoid spike in their health care costs. The bill also does something for tax reform. It creates a 15% minimum tax for corporations making $1 billion or more in income, bringing in more than $300 billion in revenue from doing so. A portion got cut, though, and that's the one that narrowed the carried interest tax loophole. Arizona's Kristen Sinema agreed to sign onto the bill if this measure, which would have changed the way private equity income is taxed, was cut. Democrats said it would have brought in $14 billion more in revenue. Once again, Sinema stands up for the rich people and not for the little people on the other side of the pay scale. Instead, a 1% excise tax on stock buybacks was introduced, and it could bring in roughly 5 times as much revenue as the carried interest measure. However, it wouldn't take effect until next year, raising predictions of the rush of buybacks by some companies before 2023 rolls around. Once again, you let the rich have time to go stash their money and make more money. Boo-hoo. Major portion of the bill that isn't included due to the opposition from Senator Manchin in West Virginia is the extended child tax credit. He expressed last year the cost to extend the credit was too high, but progressives, including Bernie Sanders, have continued to push for its inclusion in the bill. Senator Sanders planned to add it as an amendment to the legislation during the all-night voting process, even without the support he needs to pass it. Okay, this is looking at the bill itself. That's the end of the article. So you can go to npr.org and read that article yourself, and you can find out more. So what else is on NPR tonight? Israel and Palestinian militants agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. Eastern Kentucky was looking for a fresh start after the loss of coal production, but then the floods came. There's an article on there about what you need to know about preparing financially for a baby. There's a national story about high-speed chases endangering the lives of migrants and area residents in South Texas and that area. So there's more to deal with there. An interesting story. Teen built a memorial for veterans because he didn't have one in his hometown. So let's look at that one. So this teen built a memorial for veterans in his hometown. When 17-year-old Dominique Glassman found his hometown of Olivia, Minnesota didn't have a veterans memorial, he decided to take action. Olivia is a small town that calls itself the corn capital of the world. And many residents are veterans or related to veterans, Glassman said. So I keep hearing noises from Discord, so give me a moment here. Let me just make sure that there's not anybody trying to communicate with me. So hang on. Nope, doesn't look like anybody's trying to communicate with me or the show, so that's good. Sorry for any external noises you might hear from my phones and devices, but they're all turned on. So it's Andrea. I don't know. I mean, it could be messages on my phone, but I think it's just ordinary Discord messages and things like that. So this town calls itself the corn capital of the world and is filled with a lot of veterans. So Dominic Classman, his father, grandfather, and great grandfather all served. Quote, "It's just never ending," he said about his family's roots in the military. So when it came time for the team to choose a goal for his Eagle Scouts project, he decided to build Olivia its own Veterans Memorial. To his father, Mark Jurgensen, it was natural that his son had such ambitious plans. Jurgensen is a scoutmaster of his son's troop. Quote, said Jurgensen, "I told Dominique he was starting to kind of talk about his Eagle Scout project. That's because he's the scoutmaster's son that needs to go big or go home." That seems to be written strangely. I think he was trying to say that to his son that it was time to start talking about it, but it doesn't say that. But let's just assume that's what he meant. So the young boy visited nearby towns, veterans memorials to research and get ideas, and then he came up with his modest design. So 17-year-old Classman said, quote, "I was originally picturing just a walkway with 21 boot steps and pavers on the side, along with a main stone and a couple of flags," end quote. He thought it would take about $15,000 to build, so he started fundraising. For Eagle Scout projects, candidates aren't supposed to use digital communications. So instead of using charity fundraising sites online, he launched a flyer campaign and spoke at local events. The 70-year-old said, quote, "Pretty much it was either word of mouth or going door to door," end quote. But his methods worked. His community liked the idea of veterans memorials so much that they were willing to donate much more than he expected. Very nice. When the fundraising ended, he raised $77,777 for the project. 17-year-old Classman improved the design to fit the larger budget and got to work building it. Yes, very nice lucky number, Aaron West. The finished memorial was unveiled to the public on Memorial Day, and it features 280 engraved pavers leading to the flagpoles and places to sit, surrounded by landscape plants. That's a lot more than 21. Quote, "By the time everything was said and done, we definitely went big," end quote, laughed the young man. During the ceremony, his neighbors told him how much they appreciated what he had done for the town. He continued, quote, "There's one person that came up to me and they said that they are so happy to see this," end quote. And he continued, quote, "They've been living in this town for 10 to 15 years and they were waiting for something like this to even happen," end quote. Classman's favorite part of the memorial are the 21 boot prints stamped into concrete leading to the flagpoles, made to represent the 21 gun salute. His father helped him by putting on the combat boots he wore when he served and making the prints. So nice. Prints are his father's own boot prints. Quote, "It was nice being able to be part of that. Being a veteran myself, getting that piece out there for other veterans and their families have a place to go to remember their service or remember their loved ones." Yes, that is indeed very cool, Aaron. So that's the end of the quote. As for what's next, Glassman already said he's talking to his brothers about what they'll do down the line for Eagle Scout projects. So, very nice story. And again, go back to the top of the story, and that was in what was that again? Olivia, Minnesota. Good evening, Debbie. Welcome to the broadcast. So, we've had a couple of stories. We had a story about Democrats passing the spending bill. We had this story about memorial. Yeah, I'm having a good day. Very happy to have air conditioning this evening. Had to get it repaired earlier today. So we have stuff about the elections. Something about when to in COVID isolation. Something about curiosity. And we have this story where large employers express opposition after Indiana approves abortion ban. That one is from yesterday. Abortion right groups and at least two large employers expressed opposition after Republican Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb signed a new abortion ban into law on Friday, which takes effect on September 15th. The bill has passed the State House 62 to 38 earlier in the day on Friday before the State Senate approved it 28 to 19 late Friday night. The actions make Indiana the first state to pass new legislation for an abortion ban since the Supreme Court took down Roe v. Wade in June. Other states have banned abortion since then, but have done so through existing trigger laws that were set to take effect once Roe was struck down. Quote, following the overturning of Roe, I stated clearly that I would be willing to support legislation that made progress in protecting life. In my view, the bill accomplishes this goal following its passage into both chambers of the Indiana General Assembly with a solid majority of support. These actions followed long days of hearings filled with sobering and personal testimony from citizens and elected representatives on this emotional and complex topic, end quote, said Governor Holcomb of that state. Abortion will soon be banned in the state, but there are some exceptions, including if a pregnant woman's life is at risk. Debbie comments, I read today the names of 43 Republicans who voted against a $35 cap on insulin. So disgusting. Yes, true. Andrea asked, isn't he up for re-election? That is Eric Holcomb. Eric Holcomb of Indiana, current term. It shows. Why does it? Shows him the incumbent. Shows that he assumed office in 2017. Not sure what the tenure of office is, because it doesn't show that. Might show it under election history. it shows that he assumed office on January 9th of 2017. So what is the length of term for an Indiana governor? It's 4 years. I mean, so did he come in as the? I mean, he should be up for re-election, but maybe he was re-elected last year. That's what I think, because he was in up. So yeah, I mean, he was elected in 2020 and he started serving again in 2021. So yeah, he's going to be back re-elected 2024. So anyway, thank you for that, Aaron. I don't know why it doesn't just say it. So where were we in the article? Abortion will soon be banned in the state, but there are some exceptions. If a woman's life is at risk, and for rape and incest and lethal fatal anomalies, though the law imposes a complicated process for performing abortions under the exceptions. Shouldn't be any kind of complexity there. Not when you're dealing with rape, incest, or things that might kill the woman carrying the baby. Doctors in the state who perform illegal abortions will lose their medical license. Hello, Jim. Looks like Jim is joining the chat. So I don't see Jim yet, but I guess you all see Jim joining the chat. So checking in from Twitch. Hey, Cigar F1. Hello. Good evening. So doctors who violate this law will lose their medical license, and it will strip licenses from facilities that currently perform abortions that are not hospitals or outpatient clinics owned by hospitals. So basically, if a doctor violates this procedure, they'll also shut down the place if it's not a hospital. If it's a hospital, they can't shut it down, obviously, because hospitals treat other things. Jim says, I know I'm late, but diabetes resulting from pre-diabetes is usually maintained with meds and not insulin. It kind of depends, I guess. I mean, I'll defer to the nurse in chat, so I'll defer to Andrea to answer on that rather than answer that, Jim. Because my concept is pre-diabetes is probably related to type 2. So if I'm correct, then yes, you're correct. If pre-diabetes is related to type 1, then insulin's usually in order. But yeah, I think pre-diabetes is type 2, but I'll let Andrea confirm that, or I'll look it up. Because I think pre-diabetes is when you've been eating so much that you're starting to get some of the symptoms without actually being classified diabetic yet. So yeah, might as well just answer that. I think Andrea is busy in other places right now. So what is pre-diabetes? Well, they say that it's basically diabetes, but a step behind. And it is the condition leading up to type 2, so we were correct. So that is usually treated with metformin, as Aaron indicated, because metformin is the most common medication for people with type 2 diabetes. So, as we were discussing earlier, the new law will make Indiana part of a block of states in the central U.S. where abortion is banned and force those seeking the procedure to travel farther to get a procedure. Planned Parenthood called the legislation, quote, an egregious attack on health care in Indiana, end quote, and noted the group's facilities would not be able to provide abortions after it takes effect, even in this circumstance where exceptions are granted. Quote, the way Indiana lawmakers move this bill hastily and without regard for people it will impact most is cruel and out of touch, end quote, said Planned Parenthood CEO Rebecca Gibran, who is from the great Northwest, Hawaii, Alaska, Indiana, and Kentucky. So she represents all those places. Jim says he doesn't have to do the finger pricking test for blood glucose, but he does have to check his A1C. Andrea says, be careful with metformin, it can cause joint pain. So, yes, you wouldn't want to take too much of it, that's for sure. She continued, quote, Governor Holcomb shut off his phones, cowering from his constituents, and signed their fates away to a future without bodily autonomy and access to fundamental health care. She said, the organization, quote, will continue the fight for a future that reinstates our right to safe and legal abortion care for every Hoosier. So the other part of this article was large employers expressed their concern over Indiana passing this abortion bill. Jim says pain is God's way of telling you you're still alive. Well, then apparently I'm still alive because when I raise this arm, sometimes it hurts. Companies within the state are already taking note of the law. The pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly has more than 10,000 employees in Indianapolis. The company said it is, quote, concerned that this law will hinder Lilly's and Indiana's ability to attract diverse scientific, engineering, and business talent from around the world, quote, closed, in a statement provided to the NPR. Quote, while we expanded our employee health plan coverage to include travel for reproductive services unavailable locally, that may not be enough for some current and potential employees, end quote, said Eli Lilly. So, in answer to what Indiana has done, they plan to put all their future growth of their company, Eli Lilly, outside of Indiana, where they've been for 145 years. So, yes, Jim, that's what they said. Also, another company, Cummins, an engineering manufacturing company headquartered in Columbus, Indiana, has 10,000 employees in that state, and it opposes the law. And so their spokesperson, John Mills, told NPR, Cummins believes that women should have the right to make reproductive health care decisions as a matter of gender equity. The right to make decisions regarding reproductive health ensures that women have the same opportunity as others to participate fully in our workforce and that our workforce is diverse, end quote. Mr. Mills said parts of the law conflict with the company's beliefs and will, quote, impede our ability to attract and retain top talent and influence our decisions as we continue to grow our footprint with a focus on selecting welcoming and inclusive environments, end quote. So, there's two companies that are basically telling Indiana, we're going to say goodbye to you because of that bill. Okay, now reminder, you're watching Freedom Speech and You. I'm your host, Ken, and we are expecting Liberal Dan as our guest very shortly, approximately 8 minutes away. So invite your friends because we're going to talk to Liberal Dan about how he got his start, and we'll do that as soon as he gets here. So, oops, I killed the stuff that was. Liberal Dan says, I just have to finish 2 tacos. Yes, you have to eat before you get started. So let's take that out. So hey, so while we wait for Liberal Dan, you may notice that my face is not whitewashed tonight because I took the time to adjust the camera to correct that. This may not be my actual skin color, but it's close enough, and it makes me look more like Andrea when she is on camera, so that we are not looking like the pale white man and the lady with the tan. So we will look much better tonight. Um, Obviously, if I could see myself as clearly as I see myself right now, it would be a lot easier to make adjustments. But when I make adjustments, the view is much smaller than this appears. So, not as easy. Did you all have any topics that you wanted to discuss tonight before we bring Dan on? So, and no, whatever you want to discuss, pretty much everything, as long as it is within proper political discourse. Where's that pretty lady that's usually there with you? Well, that pretty lady has another task to do this evening and can't be on camera because it would be just a bit too much. You know, she is like a superwoman, that Andrea, but there are even limitations on what the superwoman can do. So she will be back next week, but you can thank Andrea for booking our guest, Liberal Dan, tonight. So he'll be on in about 5 minutes. So let's go find some more stuff on NPR to talk about. So npr.org. And we'll see what we can talk about. Let's talk about this one for a few minutes. Aaron says, I had something, but I forgot. Well, you'll remember before the show is over, I hope. So, this article, Republicans have long feuded with the mainstream media. Now many are shutting them out. Here's our local governor, DeSantis. Jim says, I stopped in at Hal's, but it's just a rerun. Yes, that's the nature of things where Trump is concerned, but it is very important to continue to make sure that Trump does not get to tell his lies without somebody rebutting all of same. So the article was written by Daniel Kurtzelben. Kurtzelben. I'm going to hope that I said her name right. Danielle. Danielle starts. I went to Wisconsin in June to report on how abortion rights are affecting the Senate and governor primaries. The idea was do a story on the Democrats and one on the Republicans. Long story short, I heard back from the Democrats, but not the Republicans. Phone calls, emails, Facebook messages, I didn't hear back from anyone. The top Republican governor candidates posted no events though their social media showed they were out talking to voters. And so, when I happened to catch the top two GOP governor candidates walking in Okanawak 4th of July parade, I ran to the end of the route to catch them. I found Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Cleefish greeting supporters. A staffer who then stepped between us told me they knew I had been reaching out and that I should contact a communications staffer to whom I had already reached out. He would get back to me, she assured me. He did not, and a day later, at a publicly advertised meet and greet for governor candidate Kevin Nicholson, a staffer told me I wouldn't be allowed to even get tape of Nicholson greeting attendees. As stand-in anecdotes, these might not be a huge deal. However, they are also a part of the trend Republican candidates ignoring or actively avoiding legacy media, particularly the national outlets. The phenomenon is impossible to quantify, but many Republican candidates are showing that they don't want or need to get their messages out via legacy media outlets. That can reduce the scrutiny they face while running for public office, hampering voters' ability to make informed choices. A large group of reporters was kept out of a rally this spring for Republican gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano, I'm not sure which, in Pennsylvania. CBS's Robert Costa confronted a man who was blocking the press from entry. Quote, if you're with the campaign, we can have a dialogue, Costa said. No dialogue, the man responded. Okay, so Jim says, the GOP don't want to speak to average folks unless you have millions to contribute. Exactly, Jim. And Andrea agrees. So Kobe Itkowitz says, here's video of the guy refusing to answer Costa reports questions about who from the Mastriano campaign has authorized blocking press. Let's see what that video sounds like.
If you're with the campaign, you can have a dialogue.
No dialogue. Why no dialogue?
I don't understand who you speak with. Are you just letting someone who's come in to support Mastriano and you're standing here to block the press from coming in? Because if that's the case, you don't really have the right to do that. If you're just a random person...
I know my rights. Will you please step behind? So I'm asking.
What's the First Amendment?
Will you please step behind?
Is this your land? Is this private land that you own? And I don't understand who you are. Are you security for Mastriano? If you are, that's good to know that you're blocking us from coming in. I assume you're security for Mastriano. Is that right? Is there anyone from the Mastriano campaign here? Is there anyone from Mastriano's campaign?
Step behind.
I don't. Is there anyone from the Mastriano campaign? If you're with the campaign, we can have a dialogue.
No dialogue. Why no dialogue?
So they don't want to talk. And I'm hoping you could hear that. I know it wasn't very loud and there wasn't any way to turn it up much more. Reporters have been frustrated in getting extremely limited access to other Republicans running for office, like Georgia Senate candidate Herschel Walker and Alaska congressional candidate Sarah Palin. Okay, so we could go through that, but we have our guests on tonight, so I'm going to take that out. Give me a second to take out that article. And I'm going to bring in our guest, Liberal Dan. Hey, good evening, Liberal Dan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Good. I was having minor difficulties trying to get the settings all set up so I could, be seen and everything. So, but we're good.
Okay. Well, we enjoy having you on our podcast this evening.
My
So
pleasure.
it is my intention to ask you how you got your start. So, what made you want to get into the talk radio?
Well, way back when, I used to call into some of the local conservative shows, and I'd always be like wherever I lived at the time, like Kenner, Louisiana was my home for a little bit. So I'd be calling and be like, "Hey, it's Dan from Kenner," or when I moved to Algiers, which is part of New Orleans, I'd be like, "Hey, it's Dan from Algiers." And the host, John Osterland, who I don't know if he's back on the air yet. If you're up in the Northeast, you might have also known him as Ozone. He used to be more of a shock jock back in the day, and now he's more talk. He would be like, "Look who it is! It's Liberal Dan," and I would meet people like I was out and about, and it would come up that I was Liberal Dan, and people would get excited that they met Liberal Dan as if I'm some sort of local celebrity, and I was like, "This is so surreal." I couldn't quite understand, but enough people were getting like, "Oh my God, it's Liberal Dan," that I was like, okay, I need to go do something about this. So that's when I registered the domain, I made the LLC, and I was looking around for podcast options, which I initially started just purely on Blog Talk Radio. And then, from there, it just kind of grew. We also, before I started the podcast, though, I did have for about 10 months, I had a terrestrial radio type show, like over the airs on WGSO. Down here in New Orleans, and it was kind of like a pay-as-you-go, so we had to pay for the airtime on the station. But me and a guy named David Garrity, I had run for Congress in 2004. He ran for Congress in 2006 in the same seat. I helped volunteer for his campaign, and we became friends, and we decided to do a radio show together for a bit. And back then, it was Dan and Dave on the air, and I came up with the Talk from the Left, That's Right bit. And then when I moved on from that, because it was just getting too expensive and wanted to do the, maybe a cheaper option, I then, kept the Talk from the Left, That's Right with Liberal Dan Radio. And it's been a thing ever since. And I've been trying to, it's been slowly growing as I've, worked in my field as a software developer. I've eventually, hopefully to get big enough one day to be able to, maybe do this full time. I don't know. We'll see. But if not, I have been having a growing following, especially recently since I've had Hal on my show, and this past year has been the best year of Liberal Dan Radio.
So how many stations do you have in Liberal Dan Radio? Do you know?
Well, Liberal Dan Radio is just online. It just
Okay.
airs on Blog Talk Radio and on YouTube. And I'm at this point, I'm using Blog Talk Radio as simply just the ability to accept phone calls and to be able to have a soundboard that I have everything conveniently there. But pretty much I'm just on YouTube at the moment. So it's not really radio per se. Like I don't stream live to any radio station as of yet, at least at the moment. I mean, I'm always open to it, but if I started doing that, I would definitely have to, at that point, work in, some censor ability, so that if somebody drops an F-bomb here or there, that they'll be able to dump that out, because don't want to violate any FCC rules or whatever.
Okay, so we have your URL for your YouTube on screen so that everybody watching this either live or later can find you.
Appreciate that.
We want to make sure to promote that. And I did pull back and show your camera earlier. I'll do that again.
This is something new that I've come up with just this month, where the Grow Left idea, where I'm trying to help, smaller, maybe medium-sized, I don't know what a definition of small or medium would be, but trying to grow podcasts, radio shows, YouTube channels, because the conservatives have a really big advantage when it comes to all that. They have a lot of talk shows on radio. They have a lot of podcasts. They have a lot of popular YouTube channels, and I don't think the left has as much. And I think that, with this program, I've partnered with a group called Level Field, which enables smaller entities to be able to leverage bigger tools that are usually only available to the big money donors. And hopefully we can use that money not only to advertise causes and advertise on issues and for or against candidates, but in a way that also helps to support and bolster, smaller channels, smaller blog podcasts, etc. So, and as part of that, I'm going to start doing like links of the week, my Liberal Dan links of the week as well, where it's just start talking about, other, left-leaning podcasts where we can just kind of help each other grow. Because back in the day, you didn't need 1,000 subscribers on YouTube to get monetized. You could be monetized as long as you check certain boxes on, whether or not, on proving who you were. And at that point you could be monetized. I think I made $100 one time on a video I made about the Disney dining plan on my personal account. But now because a lot of people were violating the rules, they threw the baby out with the bathwater, and now you have to have 1,000 subs. So I want to push this idea that I'm trying to reach 1,000 subs by the end of September, but I also would love to be able to use my platform and this thing to help other people get there as well. Because once we start getting more, the ability to be larger and have a larger audience, we can then get support like the bigger ones do. Like I remember one time I was watching some legal channel. I think it was during the Johnny Depp Amber Heard civil trial, and it was this legal channel that has like 2 million subscribers, and somebody did a super chat of like $2,000. I'm like, why does this big legal channel need a $2,000 thing? This should be the stuff that should be going to the smaller guys to be able to help them build out. But at the moment, we gotta play by the rules that YouTube gives us. So if we don't get 1,000 subs, we can't get monetized. So
okay, so I wanted more about your background. You mentioned that you do have another career. Do you want to talk about that career, what you do, what got you into this? Like, for instance, I'm a broadcast engineer. So,
okay.
And I literally wanted to be on the radio. Did you literally want to be on the radio?
I don't know if I ever, when I was young, I never really thought to myself and said, I want to be a radio star. I did enjoy listening, and I loved when I got on the radio, when I call in, but I never really, I didn't really know as a kid really what I really wanted to do. I started off when I came down here to New Orleans to go to Tulane University. I started off as an environmental engineering, and it was my first time, out of my hometown in New Orleans, which is a party city. And the only class I did well in my freshman year was my software development class and Fortran. So I switched majors that summer and I started going for software development, get a computer science degree. And I graduated with that. I did some post-bachelor's work with that as well. But Katrina kind of got in the way with that. But then as I started getting more involved with politics, I think I really started, getting really interested in politics about the summer before, or the summer of 2000. So before the 2000 debacle, I really started, debating politics, trying to understand the issues more, trying to get in, be able to debate the topics better and be more educated about that. And I found myself really digging really deep into like the issues, like when people would argue about the, what happened with the recounts and everything in Florida in 2000. Like I went in there and I read the rules so when conservatives would say something like, well, why is Al Gore doing this and not that? I can come back with the answer, say, well, this is why, because the law requires him to do this in a particular way. And then I had once I heard the idea of, this radio station that's typically mostly conservative was like, hey, do you want to come on the air and you can have your own show? I was like, well, that sounds interesting. Let me try that. And then once I did it, that's when I kind of realized I really enjoy doing this. And I really would love to be able to do this more often. And then as I've been growing the podcast, I've been thinking, well, if for some reason I could do that, I would love to, but I'm still also a pretty good programmer. I'm still good at, dealing things logically. I think a lot of the times my stances on politics often stems from my being a software developer, because as someone who's a software developer, your code often has to deal with the boundary conditions, the exceptions, the things that cause your program to break, not the everyday things. And that's when I look at laws, I often consider that like, okay, so this law might be good for like the 80, 85, 90% of the people, but what about the 10%? What about the people who fall on the edges, who might be failed by this law, or the law might not adequately cover? So a lot of the times I'll take that into consideration as well as I'm doing politics. So it's my being trained to how to look at things logically, I think, has helped with my political discussions as well. But I don't know if they necessarily went really as hand in hand. I mean, it helps with the technical stuff, clearly, but of getting a podcast done, of doing some things. But I kind of like, I've always, for a while, I've had like a bunch of pokers in the fire as well. Like I do gaming as well. I have a gaming stream as well that I'll do occasionally. I'm trying to build that as well. I have a book that I'm writing. I have, I was doing a ride sharing blog when I was doing ride sharing stuff. So I had so many pokers in the fire, and I was always afraid to take any one of them out, because what if I pulled the wrong one out? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Jim comments that he learned SUPAC, a derivative of Fortran, in college for running statistical analysis. You two could possibly compare notes on programming.
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, the everybody who was in doing an engineering type degree had to take at least Fortran. That was the basic course that you had. No, I shouldn't use basic course, because basic is another thing, but it was the base course that you had to take. And like, I just happened to, really latch on to it. And thinking back to it, like randomly one day at school at University of New Orleans, because I switched to University of New Orleans because they had a better program. And I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and he went to the summer camp for a couple of years in Pennsylvania, a sleepaway camp. And I'm sitting there in the doctor's office in University of New Orleans, and I look over to the right, and I look at this guy, and I'm like, Corey? And he looks at me, and he's like, whoa, because we were friends in summer camp and we lost touch, but here we are in New Orleans talking to each other. And when I told him I was doing a computer science degree, he was like, oh, I remember that you got a computer when you were 13 and you were very excited about it. So I probably should have considered some computer stuff more, much further, much earlier, but, it never really clicked that my enjoyment of having computers and being able to do some minor things should have translated to, hey, this should be my degree. But I figured that out a year late.
Jim comments he doesn't remember any of it 40 years later. I don't much either, Jim. The one thing I remember from Fortran is don't put the number in the wrong column, because otherwise, instead of skipping 2 lines on the printout, you'll skip 2 pages. And that's how long ago I did Fortran with paper punch card stacks and printout papers.
It's also kind of funny, like my dad went to college initially for chemistry, and he ended up graduating with a computer science degree, and he became a software developer for Social Security. He was doing machine code stuff, so he was really down deep in it. My uncle, he went to college for music. He could play almost any instrument you ever wanted him to, and he eventually changed his career and became a software developer. And then, so it wasn't a shock that I went to college for one thing and then went for software development. My cousin, she just went right for software development, and now she works for Google. So she was the smartest one of the bunch, because he realized, hey, we have a bunch of nerds in the family. I should just embrace this, just like the rest of them did it later on.
Mm-hmm. So what else do you want to talk about besides all of these things you've talked about so far?
I mean, I'm open for questions or any sort of topics that you want to discuss.
So how about the audience? Audience, what questions do you have for Liberal Dan tonight? You want to throw some questions in chat? See what you have to talk about. While they're thinking about questions, who are your favorite hosts from the podcast world? You want to mention some names?
I mean, I used, for a while before I was aware of Hal. Well, I was aware of Hal for a while from his stand-up, but I wasn't necessarily aware of Hal as being, a political commentator. I used to listen to Stephanie Miller some, during the mornings, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. I would listen to a bunch of the people that are on Sirius XM, but I think honestly, like I tend to not listen too much to. I mean, I watch Hal's show now because I enjoy listening to Hal's show and watching what he does, and he keeps me on my toes because he sometimes we'll think of the same stuff, and I'll be like, well, now I have to come up with a new thing to come up with because he just basically said what I was planning on saying, so I need to go in further detail with it, or maybe come up with a new topic. But a lot of the times, what I'll do is I'll take a lot of time to listen to, the conservative ones. Like I'll from the local ones, like this guy locally, I get a lot of my clips from Jeff Carrere. He's down here in New Orleans. He's been a local, host for a while. And for being as conservative, and he's one of these, the election was stolen from Trump people. So he's way out there, but back in 2004, he actually was very helpful in my campaign. Like he was very helpful and encouraging of me running, and of the people that helped out. He helped out some, which is much more than I would expect a conservative Republican to do. But I don't think he liked the individual who was running, who was the anointed favorite. So, I think he wanted to see him maybe knocked down a peg, but that didn't happen, unfortunately. But a lot of times, I'll watch, some of the more conservative ones, like, Steven Crowder, like his terribleness. Like I did a live reaction to one of his videos and nitpicked, a lot of his points. And that's what I think, some of my strengths lie is picking apart the arguments of other people and finding the logical inconsistencies. It's almost like debugging someone else's code, looking at what the argument that they've made and just finding all the problems and finding all the errors. So that's what I tend to do. So it doesn't leave me with a lot of time to listen to more other podcasts because I'm trying to do more research for the show.
Okay. So Andrea asked, what do you think will happen with the January 6th investigation?
Honestly, I think, I understand a lot of people are frustrated that they haven't seen Merrick Garland, come up with charges for the upper people like Trump and a lot of his, higher up aides. But I think he's doing this very methodically. I think he's doing this purposefully, and I a lot of times, when I've criticized people on the right for wanting, somebody who was charged with the crime to be like, send him up the river. I'm like, no, we need to take our time and build a case, and if he's guilty, make sure you dot all your I's and cross all your T's to make sure that when you get those charges done and you get a conviction, that the conviction sticks. So I think that's what Garland is doing here with Trump and the other, higher up folks. I think eventually he will get there. I know who's to say whether or not they'll be able to get a conviction. Who knows? I never thought Trump was going to win the election to begin with, and that, so strange things happen. But I do think that eventually we'll see charges against Garland, or not against Garland, by Garland against Trump, so that we can hold the people accountable for what they need to be. And of course, there's going to be people who are going to fight back against it, but you got to think that that there's the conservatives, especially the extremists and the ones that are Trumpers, are really in the minority, and it's just a matter of you have to get the people who are the middle who are being pulled on certain issues. You have to figure out how to, say, look, this is what happened. It was really bad, and he can't be allowed to get back in charge again. And hopefully, that will stick, and it'll the punishment and any convictions gotten will make him, not be able to win an election because he won't be popular enough. Now, you can be a felon and still be president. I used to think that wasn't the case, and I don't know why I thought that was the case, but you can still be a felon and be president. But hopefully the people wouldn't elect one once that happens.
So Jim comments, we need Moon Mission type aggressive increased funding of public education, especially civics and critical thinking. STEM advancements would benefit from this. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, absolutely. I think that we definitely need to have a much broader investment into public education, into having people understand not just the civics, but the history of this country, and the technical abilities to encourage more growth in the STEM type areas, especially in people for getting interest in people who traditionally have not been pushed that way. Because in even late 90s, early 2000s, I was not seeing very many women. I was not seeing very many persons of color in the class. There were some, but they were definitely underrepresented. And I think that as you invest in it, and you put more information out there as to what these things allow us to do, I believe we'll see better advancements, and it's definitely going to help lots of it'll benefit lots of people, and it'll be great in the long run. But unfortunately, you have the right in this country who is vehemently opposed to public education, because they claim, a lot of times I see, my friend Don Nimbus Yosh, he has another podcast as well. He's been on my podcast. He's part of what we call Voltron. His saying is often, hypocrisy is the conservative prerequisite. And a lot of times, they'll be arguing, oh, the liberals want to indoctrinate our kids, when in reality, the conservatives want them going to, religious schools, or want religion taught in public schools so that they can indoctrinate our kids. So, yeah. So we definitely need broader. It's going to take fights, and we need progressives, liberals, leftists, wherever, whoever can win. We need them running for offices at all levels. We need to show up for all elections. We need to, the turnout for 81 million should be every election, every time. Don't sit out elections. Rights can be lost in off years, and as we've seen, rights have been lost in off years. Ever since 2010, the conservatives have been doing this slow moving coup, and they've been able to maintain their control. You have a Democratic governor in Michigan. You have Democrats, elected statewide, I think, in Wisconsin. But the legislatures are so slanted towards the conservatives, because in 2010 they were able to gerrymander the districts, because people were apathetic in 2010 and didn't show up, and therefore it allowed the conservatives to win and then draw themselves favorable maps so that people got to choose their voters.
All right. Andrea says, in regards to January 6th, do you think they will have more hearings?
I believe that they will. I think they said when they came back from recess that they were intending on having at least one or two more hearings. I think they had said that at the end of the last one. I think they should. I think they will. I think there's definitely more to see, even if it's just a hearing as a wrap up. Like a lot of the times, people, when you read something online, they'll put a TLDR, too long didn't read. Well, do a too long didn't watch, or a hearings for dummies type thing, where here's everything laid out from the event. They should at least do that, and I'm thinking they'll probably find more, because every time they uncover a stone, they find a couple more that need to be uncovered.
Mm-hmm. Aaron says STEM should actually be STEAM. What's your opinion on that?
What's the missing A? I mean, I think
for art. So science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, you definitely need to have more arts as well. I mean, you can't have everybody in the STEM fields. You need people in there, and we need to fund the arts, because through the arts we get creativity. We foster people's, people think differently. There are people who, my wife is more of an artsy person. She wouldn't want to be a software developer, and I don't know if I would want to do her job. So there are many people with varied interests that are all valid. And one of the things that's, I think, is interesting is that one thing that should be considered is that as technology grows, there is a point where automation causes job loss. And what do you do at that point? What do you do when automation causes job loss? Or do you just say, okay, well, too bad, find something else? Or do we foster more creative things so that people can do those things that they want to do? I mean, people often look at Star Trek and be like, this is a post-scarcity society where they can make anything they want to with replicators. So what do? You don't just throw people out to the wolves. But unfortunately, you have a situation where anytime you have an advancement that would help people, but potentially help people in general, but put some people out of work, conservatives often will fight against it, even though if it's for the betterment of society. There's a show, For All Mankind, which gives an alternate universe view of the space race and what happens had the Russians won, and then you had more women involved in this NASA space program, and they have a whole bunch of things. Well, eventually, at some point in the show, spoiler alert, the humans develop fusion technology, and they're able to have cheap, free, widely available electricity, which put oil workers out of a job. And so, and the conservatives in that show fought, that sort of thing, because what do you do about these people who are now out of a job? Let's keep our coal and our oil, despite the fact that it's expensive and harms the environment, simply because we want people to have jobs. I'm like, my solution to that has always been teach them to do something else, help foster the other interests that they might have to help them do what they can do to help them survive. Because a lot of times that's what happens when we're trying to fight coal. The people in coal states will be like, well, they want to take away your jobs. No, we don't want you to lose a job. We want to develop cleaner technologies and better energy, and maybe we can train you all to work in these fields so that you can advance your career while we're advancing society.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jim has a couple of comments that I myself want to address. Jim says STEAM encompasses everything that schools teach. When you say STEAM, you're just talking about regular curriculum. And then he said, I don't even like the term STEM. It pits one subset of education against the rest. The only thing you left out, Jim, though, is you left out history. Got to have an H for history. That's the first thing that came to mind.
That's the first thing that came to mind is history. History would definitely be not included in STEAM. And yeah, there's we need people of all stripes. We need people of, we unfortunately need lawyers. We need doctors. We need historians. We need educators. We need mathematicians. We need scientists. We need people in tech. We need people in the arts. We need people you have a well-rounded society when all of those things are fostered and developed.
Sorry, didn't mean to put that up again.
No problem.
Andrea had another question. Do you think that Dems will come out and vote? Have heard many say not going to vote on both sides.
I think that, and I think I'm not alone in this, but Roe versus Wade being overturned was a game changer. And while it gave the Republicans and the conservatives a victory that they've long sought after, they awakened the beast, as we saw with Kansas. I never expected that Kansas was going to block that amendment. I thought that amendment was going to come in, especially because the people in the extremely conservative Kansas legislature said, let's do this during a primary so that it has low turnout. Well, turnout was huge. People came out, and people came out en masse and won the day and defended the rights to body autonomy. So that, as long as we can harness that, as long as we can, emphasize, look, they're coming for your rights. There were people who back in 2016 were like, well, now I'm going to vote for Trump because, maybe I like him better, or I just don't like Hillary or whatever. And you would ask them, well, what about if Roe v. Wade gets overturned? And they'll be like, oh, that'll never happen. That's never going to happen. Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. It's never going to happen. And I'm like, you're kidding yourself. You're fooling yourself. And, in 2016, I kept saying Donald Trump could name up to 3 Supreme Court justices, and people called me crazy. And I hate being right on it, but I was right on it. I was dead on. He named 3, and by him naming 3, it changed the structure of the court. And we need to fight back. And I think what Kansas showed is that we have the power and the ability to do so, even in areas where we're not in control, because the harm that conservative policies do harms more people and makes those people go out and reject conservatism. And I think once you do that, you have the inaction on gun control. I think we have to do a good job, even before the abortion ruling and where Dobbs v. Jackson overturned Roe and Casey. We had. I kept on saying that we have to, tell these people it's the responsibility of the people who might be more conservative but really want something done on gun control, for example. They need to be convinced to come out and vote, in support of gun control, in support of the things that the Republicans are wanting to go against what the Republicans are trying to accomplish. Because, if they don't do it, you're never going to see the change that you're claiming that you want to see. So I think the Democrats have a big opportunity here. I think Wisconsin, there's a strong chance of winning the seat in Wisconsin. I think we could bring out people in Florida. I think we have the possibility in the Senate of picking up a couple seats, especially because of Dobbs.
Andrea asks, do you think we need term limits on the Supreme Court of the United States?
I sometimes worry that can bite you on the butt. Like if you were to say, because you want to work yourself. I mean, unfortunately, the court has become political, and until we get away from the court becoming political, we can say yes right now that I would love to see term limits on all of the people, because that means the oldest serving folks currently, your Alito, Thomas, Roberts, all of those people. If you could apply it to the existing terms and say, hey, you're done, because we said you can only serve X amount of years, and now you've served more than that, so you got to go. That seems to be beneficial in the short term, but it could burn you in the long term, because what happens if you get the court that you like, and then the Supreme Court justices that you like now have to go away, and they're going away in a term under a Republican president. And I mean, if we could be guaranteed to have Democratic presidents from this point out, sure, yeah, absolutely. But and yes, as Jim says, they have to be staggered like senators, but still, as you probably couldn't get away with it doing it like do the Republicans first and then the Democrats. Although the odds are you'd hit a Republican because it's 6-3. But yeah, you have to you always have to make sure that the good ideas are really good ideas and don't come back to bite you. Like Claire McCaskill would talk about what she did when she would run for Senate, is that she would back the Republican. She would run ads saying this Republican is far too conservative for Missouri, and in doing so, it would drive turnout for that extremist Republican in the primary, so that McCaskill would not have to face the more moderate Republican. McCaskill would have to face the easier to beat extremist Republican, and she would win. And that's great. But sometimes that fails, and when you do it and it fails, you then get a more extremist. So sometimes you have to consider what your good ideas might do. A lot of people think that that's what happened with Trump, that we all wanted to see Trump as the nominee because there was no way he would win, and then he won, and it bit us all in the ass.
Yeah, there is a definite difference between the Republicans and the Democrats insofar as the Supreme Court. The Republicans have a tendency to make sure that while they're in power, they get their people on the Supreme Court to retire so they can put another person that's young in there that's going to have a long lifespan to continue their policies. And we tend to keep our people in there until they, are really up in age and retire, or they pass away. And so that's one big difference is, they tend to get somebody that's in there really long term.
All right, well, a lot of people are angry at RBG for a while because she didn't resign during Obama. She didn't resign had she resigned earlier in the Obama administration, maybe we wouldn't be in the situation we are. But hindsight is also 2020. I think that the last three replacements, and two of them were just in Alito or Scalia died, so that wasn't really a forced resignation. Kennedy was a swing vote, but I think he was manipulated. I think there was definitely fishy stuff that went on there. I don't necessarily have all the proof for that, but if I was going to be a conspiracy theorist, that would be one of my top ones, that they blackmailed him into resigning and said, look, we'll throw up your clerk or whatever, your aide Kavanaugh, and we'll let him replace you. And then, of course, RBG dies, and the Republicans in the Senate prove their hypocrisy yet again, because the argument that was good at the end of Obama's term was not good anymore at the end of Trump's first term. So,
yeah, really sad, but such is the way. And Jim agrees. He said that RBG should have retired, and Kavanaugh was already a bought judge, according to Jim.
there's an interesting like meme that somebody made. It was like a mocked up picture of the New York Times, and it was I think it was back in 2016, or maybe it was 2012 even, and it was something that was trying to say this could happen, and it said Roe overturned, and it listed 9 Supreme Court justices, and one of the Supreme Court justices in this fictional court that overturned Roe was Kavanaugh. So somebody predicted Kavanaugh would be on the bench at least 6 years before it happened. And I went back and I looked at that picture once. It came up in my memories, and I was like, whoa, that person really nailed it. I mean, that person really got it. You would have to have Kavanaugh on the court to get it done.
What do you think about the recent passage of the let me get the name of it. The bill that just passed. So hang on, let me get the name of it.
The infrastructure bill, yeah, I'm blanking on the term. The Inflation Reduction Bill.
I think that's the name. Hang on. We read that earlier. But basically, the bill that passed that has climate, health, and taxes involved in it.
Right. Well, I think it's. Go ahead.
Inflation Reduction Act. That was the name of it.
So yeah, I'm glad that it passed. I was a little shocked that Manchin was leading the fight on getting it passed, especially because there was some environmental stuff in it. However, I'm wondering if I posited this on my podcast, I think last week, and that was, did Manchin do it because he could figure out a way to protect his own energy investments while, helping on others? So basically, harming any other energy interest to the benefit of his own. So he'll still make money, but the other people won't, and he doesn't care about that. But I was happily surprised again still that Manchin was leading the charge, that he convinced Sinema, and I was impressed with the Democrats when the Republicans along with Sinema were trying to eliminate one part of the provision that would I think it was the carried interest provision that would have taxed additionally some of the smaller maybe hedge funds or financial institutions or what have you, that they were ready with alternates. They were ready with another amendment to come in to replace it, to make sure that you still had the increased revenue coming in order to fight inflation and fight the deficit. Because as you reduce the deficit, you reduce the spending. And it's interesting. It's weird because a lot of the times again, people are afraid of things like, oh, well, we have this many jobs, and people try and spin it negatively. Like, well, now that you have more jobs and more people are getting paid, you're going to have higher demand, which is going to increase costs, which increases inflation. Which is like, you know what? Well, then we need to do some more, production, and then that'll offset the increase in demand, any price that comes with an increase in demand. So, but yeah, anybody? Yeah, I guess Ken had to step away for a second. But anybody has any other questions? Yeah, Jim goes, there are pork projects for West Virginia in the IRA. I'm sure that's not surprising at all. See, and Andrea says, and the PACT Act. Yeah, I mean the fact that the Republicans went against the PACT, or initially at one point went against the PACT Act and stood in its way. I think it eventually passed with a more broad majority. I think the 11 Republican senators who voted against it were my hypocrites of the week one week, or I think it might have been last week even, this past show. And because they claim to support the troops, they pay lip service, but when it comes to supporting the people that served our country, they are not willing to do so. They will fight supporting our troops, which included people like Rand Paul, like Tommy Tuberville and Pat Toomey and other people who frankly just don't really care about the troops. So let's see. The U.S. has profited for decades of low wages, and it's time to pay up. Eventually, that time is absolutely. And there are people who are just sick and tired of working for poverty wages. They're like, look, we're going to find another way to deal with it, and so nobody wants to work. Is often what they'll say. Well, nobody wants to work for poverty wages. Nobody wants to work and not get any recuperation. Like I can't imagine me having any sort of drive to go to work getting paid $8 an hour, $10 an hour. It's not, you can't, especially if that's the only salary in your house. Like you can't expect people to live like that. And either you have to, increase the minimum wage, or there were people who were concerned that increasing the minimum wage will do things like, drive small businesses out of business because they don't have the ability to pay that much because they don't have much revenue. And well, you can always adjust the tax rates of the smaller businesses to compensate for that, which is fine. I also don't think that you have the right to be in business. If you can't pay people livable wages, then maybe you shouldn't be in business, or at least you shouldn't be in business where you have to hire people. Work for yourself at that point if that's the case. But if you really are concerned with how an increase in the minimum wage would affect people and their ability to hire people in smaller type businesses, then what you could do is just implement some sort of basic UBI. I think one of the mistakes, Jim, because if business can't pay a decent wage, there's no right to be in business. Exactly. And one of the I think mistakes that took place during the pandemic, which I think the Democrats could have pushed this better to do a test run of a universal basic income, is instead of doing the Paycheck Protection Plan, instead of doing unemployment increases, they should have just given a stipend to everybody, like $300 a week or what have you, like whatever it would be, whatever that increase was, like make it $300 a week for whatever person, just give it to everybody. And then you say, well, what about the rich people? They don't need that. Well, adjust the tax rates so that once you're at a certain income point, you're no longer benefiting from the extra $300 a week because your taxes have been adjusted to offset whatever that is. And at that point, you could have had people getting that income while not requiring them to get it by having at least $1 of regular unemployment, because that was a lot of people were choosing to do that, because at that point if you lose that $1 of unemployment, you lost this entire big check chunk that was coming at you every week. And then so you make it so that people don't want to work. So what you do is they could have done that, and they could have used that as a test run for universal basic income, see how it went, and then you could be like, look, we already did this for the last year during the pandemic and it worked wonderfully. We're going to continue to do it now that we've shown it's possible, it works, and it can keep people from being, living in abject poverty. And then you also might not have had to do things like Jim Greek says, and the rent suspension was a very bad idea. You might not have needed to do things like a rent suspension if you gave the people that help, that monthly help. So
thank you for carrying on in my absence. Viewers
are watching
Freedom Speech and You. Our guest tonight is Liberal Dan of Liberal Dan Radio, and we have him on to both talk about himself and to talk about the topics. So thank you for joining us tonight, and certainly ask whatever questions. I overheard that you were discussing minimum wages. As someone who worked for minimum wage and or sub-minimum wage, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, there are places that have shown that you can do it and it doesn't drive businesses away. There are places but yeah, one of the things I've argued with, repeatedly is one of the things that Jim said is, don't come to me and complain to me that you're going to have to go out of business if you have to pay higher wages. You don't have the right to be in business. You don't have the right to slave labor. You don't have the right to that. And what happens is, these people who are dependent on these jobs, like let's say you work for a Walmart and Walmart is paying minimum wage. Walmart will schedule you in such a way where you can't even have a second job to even help you. And you shouldn't have to have a second job. Working a 40-hour work week, doing what some people might label as the minimum amount of effort to do work needed for work should pay the minimum amount that you need to live in the country. And that should be the end of it. And that shouldn't be a controversial topic. And if you did that, you could do things like get rid of a lot of the social safety nets, for people, because a lot of times welfare and food stamps are just things that benefit Walmart. They allow Walmart to pay poverty wages, and then the people who get that welfare and get food stamps wind up having to spend that money back at Walmart because they don't have much choice, because that's what they need to do. They shop at Walmart, they buy their groceries there, so they're funneling that money back into Walmart, and it's making them make even more money. And that Walmart doesn't need that assistance. So that I got that from Dave, the guy that I had my radio show with on the air, the guy that ran for Congress here in 2006. He basically made that argument to me because he first said, I don't agree with welfare. And I was like, what? And he goes, I don't agree with welfare. And then he gave his argument. And I was like, that's the kind of outside the box thinking that we need to have in this country. That's the kind of, flip things on its head and say, okay, I don't like this because it's a giveaway to the rich people. Make the rich people pay more of their fair share. So Dan keeps saying things as I type them. Well, we're right there. Brilliant minds think alike, right?
Exactly. But yeah, I've worked for the state before for less than minimum wage. Of course, they had those rules where if you worked at a college and you were a minimum number of people, there's always that loophole in the minimum wage law that says if you hire fewer than a certain number of people that you don't have to meet it.
Right.
That's what gets the I'll just pick on them because they're the first thing I think about, the churches from paying true minimum wages, because they say, well, we don't hire that many people and they're here and they get other things. But I have to say that when I made lower wages one time, I actually had one job where I got benefits over and above my wage. Most jobs, when they pay you a wage, they take the money out of your wages. But the second job I had was actually one where I got a wage and then they gave me benefits on top of it. So it wasn't as good. And the other thing that was good about the job, though, it might not have been as much pay as the competing places around it, but I wasn't getting fired every year like those people were.
Right.
Those people were getting fired every year as the contract did it. So it was kind of okay for a while. And that while ended up lasting almost 15 years. And then I switched to the job I have now. So,
well, there's like, I remember my ex-girlfriend's mother worked for a parochial school, one of the local Catholic elementary schools in the area, in kind of the outskirts of New Orleans. And she got a salary. And because she got a salary, that enabled them to pay her less than minimum wage because she agreed to a salary. So she was, I guess, an exempt employee. So therefore, whatever her salary was okay, and her salary was nothing. It was terrible.
So both Jim and Aaron mentioned that part-time employers fix it so your schedule's constantly changing so that you can't have multiple jobs. Do you see that as a problem? Do you think there should be some kind of law that says that they have to standardize your part-time employment?
People used to argue that where, during the conversations where we would discuss an increase of the minimum wage, and they're like, well, minimum wage jobs are supposed to be for kids. And I'm like, that's not the case. Minimum wage laws were for full-fledged workers. Look at what FDR said. You're wrong about why we created the minimum wage. But even if you want to make it so that, increasing the minimum wage except for maybe, high schoolers working part-time jobs. I'm like, fine, maybe we can have that discussion. But if you're going to make that exception, you also need to protect those people. You also need to say, well, these people who are students who are working for maybe less than everyone else is working for need to have open and available schedules, need to be able to take off for their finals, need to be able to take off to study or do projects, and can't have their classes interrupted because they have to worry about whether or not they're going to be able to meet the 20 hours a week. And furthermore, there are businesses, absolutely, like when the Affordable Care Act came out, some of the businesses would like, okay, we're only going to hire people for 28 hours a week. Therefore, we're no longer required to pay them insurance, for that. The places like, I haven't been to a Carl's Jr. or a Hardee's since 2010 or 2011 because the owner came out and A, lied about the law, and B, basically said, well, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing to get around it. And I'm like, well, fine. I don't have to shop. I don't have to eat at you anymore. It was cancel culture before cancel culture was cool.
Yeah. I was having a discussion with one individual that is like an independent employee, and I said it almost should be like a protection that says that if you go work for somebody and they have a dispute about how you did your job, but you had to drive to that place to do that job, they should have to at least pay you for your transportation costs. What do you feel about that?
I think a lot of times, transportation costs do interfere with. Unfortunately, it's weird. Like the federal tax laws are even weird about that. Where if I'm like doing when I did rideshare, I was a self-employed individual when I was doing rideshare, and I could write off every single mile that I drove. If it was driving from my house to my staging area or back to home from wherever I went, but personal trips wouldn't count, clearly. But like if I'm as an independent contractor, when I was an independent contractor for a few months right before the pandemic started, and I couldn't write off that mileage back and forth to work before we started working from home. I couldn't write that mileage off, and nobody can. And if you're a salaried employee, again, nobody can write that off on their taxes. And I think that if you're not going to get compensated for that, you should at least be able to write those miles off because you're having to do an expense. And if the longer somebody has to drive from their home to work, it's just, again, more of a stipend, I think, to the employer who because it's a cost of that employee's work. It costs me money to do anything that costs me money to go do my work for you should be compensated. That should be considered a fair statement. But I think a lot of people who tend to be pro-business apologists would try and fight you back on that.
Andrea asked, can they touch Social Security since they already touched Roe versus Wade? And she's saying that comments have asked that before. So I think what her question is that she's asking, was Social Security something that a president did that was like an executive order? And do you think they could remove that?
It's Social Security was law, so it's not executive order. So there's always this argument about the Social Security quote lockbox. Of course, they I guess maybe take money out of it. There was whether or not the lockbox is a myth or not, that's one thing. But in order for them to touch Social Security, it would have to be done legislatively. I don't think it would be done in the courts. Of course, you have a conservative activist court right now, and I could say I was afraid that the conservative activist court would overturn Roe v. Wade. I'm not necessarily thinking that they might do something that would nuke Social Security, but I don't know. I for a while now we've seen. You've heard Republicans talk about wanting to privatize Social Security. They want to be able to allow people to throw their money in the stock market, which is just a boondoggle for the people in the stock market. And doing who make a living buying and selling stocks. And I think that that's the concern is legislatively it might be a problem. There's some things in Social Security that I think do need to be touched on though, because for example, my mother-in-law used to work as a state employee or as a teacher in the state of Louisiana, and they hadn't opted in for whatever, so she doesn't get Social Security. She just gets a pension from the state, which is fine in and of itself. But because she doesn't get Social Security, she can't collect her spouse's Social Security benefits on when he passed away. And it's like, that's weird. It doesn't make any sense that you should not be able to take advantage of your spouse's Social Security post-death benefits, even if because you're not collecting it yourself. Aaron says there probably won't be any funds left in Social Security when I finally retire. Well, maybe not. I think they should get rid of that, the top threshold of where you put into Social Security only up to your first $100,000 of your income. I think they should make you, it should be something that comes off of every piece of every dollar of income. Some should go to Social Security, and that would help to help it. I don't think I'm just talking about the death benefit with the 250, though. As Andrea brought up, I think I'm talking more about. I think like when you, and I could be wrong, but I think when somebody passes away, I think that the survivor gets still a monthly payment as well. I could be wrong, but if there
is a specific stipulation regarding that, and if you wanted me to, I could go get the actual piece of paperwork. But in general, if you made more than the person that died, like me,
right,
then you're not going to get that money if you're making money. But if you were a person without money, like if I were disabled and waiting to be certified as disabled and collect my money, yes, I would get some of my wife's money when she died. But because I'm making money, I don't get anything more than that $250.
But I think in Louisiana, I think that's out completely, like because for teachers at least. I think for
there
teachers
might be different rules in different states because there might be different rules specific to certain people.
I think certain states had to opt in or opt out of certain things, and at the time, Louisiana was like, "Well, we're just going to have our teachers do the pension. We're not going to have them paying the Social Security." And as such, I think whatever formula it would be for a regular couple, I believe that goes out the window. And I think it's harmful. I think it's a way, it's bad for people, especially people who are older and on fixed incomes. They should be able to rely on that.
And I will go back to this. That Aaron said that there won't be any funds left in Social Security when she retires. If you let the Republicans have their way, yes, absolutely, because they do want to put the money into investments. They do not want money to be there for other things, and their only purpose is to push that money off into private funding, and they've been talking about that for a long time. I mean, the first time I ever heard that, I was still working my previous job. So that was pre-1997. And in the 2012 campaign, Paul Ryan was talking about that stuff all the time, trying to privatize it. And then, of course, now that Ryan is out of the picture, it's our former governor of Florida, Rick Scott, and the likes that keep talking about it.
Yeah, and it's a horse that's never going to die, and you can't let them have their way because you can't. What happens when somebody's trying to retire and the market crashes? Those people are screwed. So you can't. They are going to be hurt if that happens. And yes, it's true generally speaking that the market goes up over time, but you can't rely on that for any individual period of time, and you can't force people to just suck it up and wait for the market to rebound for when they want to retire. So
hi, Embezzler. Embezzler says Social Security was established to create a safeguard to stop people who are unable to work any longer to receive a basic income to subscribe, and continues with, I have clients who have income in excess of $150,000 who scream when they hear they may not be able to receive their Social Security money. In their case, it isn't a safeguard, it's their fund money. Yep.
That's true. I do like the name Embezzler. That's clever.
And Jim says the top 1% will make money off your Social Security investments, and that's why they want it. Absolutely, Jim.
Yep.
So.
And then when they act bad and they fail, they get their golden parachute and they get to go right off into the sunset, while the people who were relying on that money get to suffer, which is a standard tune of American politics.
Mm-hmm. So did we miss anything?
I don't think so. I think we caught most of them.
I know
but
that I don't know if I put this one up earlier, but Jim says Social Security is not a budget item. It's distinct like the United States Postal Service. The talk now is to reauthorize it periodically. Yes, that's Rick Scott's idea.
Yeah, and the whole postal service is, people complain about how the postal service is in debt, or the Republicans be like, "Oh, the postal service is so poorly managed." The postal service, because of the money that it has, that it doesn't bring in. Well, the postal service in, I think, 2005, the Republican Congress and Republican President Bush signed into law this thing that required the postal USPS to pay 70 years, to have funded 70 years of benefits, something that's no other entity is required to do. And that's why they run budget deficits, because they are being required to do something that no other entity is required to do when it comes to retirement benefits. So it's a monster of their own creation. A lot of times the conservative mantra is, government is terrible, elect me and I'll prove to you how terrible it really is. And then they'll say, see, it's government's fault. Not my fault. They don't take any fault to it, but
Okay, Andrea wants to talk about Governor DeSantis and him running, not running in Florida governor's race. So I think when she says running, not running, she's talking about whether he is or is not running for president. And she wanted your opinion on the Florida governor's race, where we have some candidates who are opposing Governor DeSantis, namely Nikki Fried, our state agricultural commissioner, and the former governor Charlie Crist.
Right. And Chris is running as a Democrat.
Correct.
Even though he was a Republican before.
Correct.
So
because he cannot rerun as a Republican, he'd be, I guess, termed out.
That's weird that he
run
can
as a Democrat. I think
that's a strange thing in the law, that if it's your ability to rerun is based on party affiliation. I mean, I think I would much rather Fried. I mean, not as someone who doesn't live there but vacations there a lot, I would much rather Fried over Chris. Clearly, I think that's probably the whatever. But I think anybody's better than DeSantis. So right. It's problem is that Florida. I mean, I don't know how the Republicans in Florida can still be in control other than gerrymandering and other shenanigans, because I think in 2016, the same year that Trump won and he won Florida, a ballot initiative passed that in Florida to restore voting rights to felons, and that passed. But then the Republican legislature was like, okay, well, that's fine, but we're going to add some addendums to that and be like, okay, we're gonna make you have to pay all your fines first. I'm like, no, that's not what the people voted for. The people voted for you to be able to, sure, you can make them pay whatever fines you want them to pay, as long as they're legal and as long as it's justified. But I'm sure some of them are excessive, but you don't go against the will of the people that just voted. So Florida has a history of disenfranchising voters, and they're going to continue to do so. And the fact that we need turnout in Kansas, like the Kansas turnout needs to happen in Florida. And if that happens, you'll maybe at least plug the hole when it comes to replacing the governor. Again, legislatures are going to be a much harder row to hoe, so to speak, because you have to deal with whatever gerrymandering has taken place in the state. But if you can get the statewide offices, you can at least stop the bleeding.
So you touched on a very important thing there with Florida, gerrymandering. That is very much in control. They have tried to take a district that was predominantly African American and redistrict it to make it a white district, so that they can get rid of one of the minority candidates that's currently in that office. And you touched on the the other thing, the fact that people need to get out to vote, but there's a couple of things by not being a Florida resident that you may not be familiar with. And one is we have people in the Hispanic culture who come from Cuba, and every time they hear the Democrats compared to socialism, they think Castro. And so they will not vote for a Democrat. The other thing we have going on here is in that community, we have Republicans who speak fluent Spanish, so they can speak to them directly in their own language and give them, you know, their version of the truth, which is not the truth.
Right.
And so they're reading campaign literature as well that's written that way. We had 3 offices where they ran somebody as an independent, and they actually charged these people, but they ran somebody as an independent that had the same name as one of the candidates, same last name. So it would be like, my last name is Smith or Jones. So there was candidate A and candidate B whose name was Smith, and then there was another Smith. So they ran a Smith against a Smith, somebody who wasn't even really a legitimate candidate, somebody who didn't even provide the press with a picture of themselves so that they could divide the vote.
Wow.
So they
I'm
did that
surprised.
dirty trick, so we have all these dirty tricks going on, and of course all of the Republican stuff is always written as I'm the patriotic candidate, I'm the one that's protecting freedom while they're taking your freedom away, and it's always that way. That's
And then,
how they write it. And the minute I read the slogan, protecting your freedom or something to that effect, I'm like, okay, you're a Republican. I'm gonna go look
right.
and see who the other person is.
Well, one of the things that's again more hypocrisy from conservatism is the whole idea between the difference between like people coming in from Mexico and people coming in, across the Gulf from Cuba into Florida, is that if the Republicans will never fight the one leg on dry land type policies, that if somebody comes from Cuba, they're welcome with open arms. But yet somebody comes across from Mexico and now you have to deport them because they're, quote, illegals, even though coming to the country and asking for asylum is a perfectly legitimate act and a legal act to do. You're legally allowed to do so under U.S. and international law. But it's weird. Like I used to work at a place where there was a lot of Hispanic workers, a lot of people from various different countries, and like the person who was from Cuba, who was a Republican, and she was very much your stereotypical like Cuba, and talking about like, oh well, you can't let these people come across the border. I'm like, are you serious? You mean people? You have people in your family who came across a border. It's just yeah, maybe I've got wrong Gulf versus Atlantic. I don't know where the dividing line is between where the Gulf ends and the Atlantic begins, I guess. So geography in that area might not be my strongest
well,
suit.
at least it seems as though it is. I mean, so let's be specific. So we'll ask, in what ocean? So we'll ask.
It might depend where in
It's
Cuba.
situated just south of the Tropic of Cancer at the intersection of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I'm looking at the map. There's the Yucatan Channel that kind of goes
it
between
says
the
it's an island nation in the Caribbean Sea on Wikipedia, so I guess it's in the Caribbean Sea. So
There you go.
none of us was right. Unless somebody said Caribbean Sea.
Yeah. Jim DeGreek is very wet around Cuba. Yes, it is very wet around there. Unfortunately, and sometimes it gets even wetter as the storms are crossing across Cuba to come batter us. Either in Florida or anywhere else on the Gulf Coast.
No, it's not. So that's not true.
Fake news. Fake
To
news.
which I put up, oops.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody ever said I knew geography. That's not my forte. Hey, Wes Webb.
Wes.
I want to be here, but I continue to torture myself with house sparks. Well, that's because you're watching, number 45, the broken record of presidents.
Right.
The guy that just repeats himself over and over again. I think it's fascinating that he's number 45 because he literally is a short record just repeating himself over and over again.
Exactly. The broken record. But yeah, shout out to Wes and Aaron for being two of my patrons. So thank you all for that.
Okay. So what other questions do you want to ask Liberal Dan? Any more questions?
Anyone? Bueller?
I'm gonna pull my camera out again so that they can see.
Yeah, the QR code is basically the same thing as the link, the grow left.liberaldan.com. That's one thing that I have it's in my new project to try and help smaller podcasts, help smaller YouTube channels grow, etc. So, but in reality, before you contribute to that, I'm going to say I would much rather people go to the Patreon first and become a Patreon supporter before they support that. So and most importantly, I'm trying to get people to come to get everybody to help subscribe to everybody's channel and help everyone grow to 1,000 followers or subscribers on YouTube, so that we all can benefit from the channel views and all can benefit from commercial advertising, and everyone's won. So Andrea brought up the midterms. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm in general agreement with Hal. I believe that because of the overturning of Roe, because of what happened there, I believe that the Democrats have a much stronger chance of A, retaining the House, and B, growing in the Senate, like increasing the number of seats in the Senate to take away power from any one individual senator like Manchin or Sinema, to be able to block needed legislation so that we could do things like expand the court. We don't want to expand the court until after the midterms, clearly, because if we did it beforehand and the Republicans won, then the Republicans either block any Supreme Court nominations and or wait to 2024 and just get to name the new people to the expanded court like they did with Scalia's seat. Aaron asks when we're doing the cook-off. I'm assuming that's between me and my friend Don, the host of the Most Nimbus. I don't know yet. When you come to visit New Orleans, Aaron, we can we'll do the cook-off at that point. Maybe we can do it in my backyard. Don can bring stuff. I can make stuff. We have a pool, so there you go.
Okay. What did we not do? So how about mentioning when your podcast is on for anybody that's not familiar, although I think everyone watching tonight is familiar, but you never know who will watch later.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. My podcast is Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Central, blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan, or here on YouTube, youtube.com/liberaldanradio. You can also, I think, go to youtube.liberaldan.com. That will bring you to the same place. And sometimes we go live other times as well if there's something big that happens that needs to be discussed. Like as soon as they dropped or they leaked the Dobbs versus Jackson ruling, I did a 3-hour response video to that night. When the ruling came out with the additional stuff like the concurrences and the dissent, we did another 3-hour show on that, and that show also had me and all the members of our Voltron crew, i.e. Don and Deminox and Chris. But to always keep your eye out, because I might announce on Twitter, Liberal Dan Radio on Twitter, or I might announce on YouTube, on Facebook, facebook.com/Liberal Dan. I'll announce places that I am going to be going live with special things, or I might even on my show announce when I'm going to do a special live. Like sometimes there was one thing where I think it was in response to the Dobbs v. Jackson leak that Steven Crowder did something where he went out and tried to ask people questions, and so we responded to that video. And I think there's another YouTuber that I did respond to. It was one time we went 6 hours one day. It was crazy how long we went. But yeah, so just youtube.com/liberaldanradio. Just follow, subscribe, get notifications, and you'll see whenever it is I go live. And if you become a Liberal Dan Radio patron, you also get to join the Discord, unless I special invite you, which is also possible. And then you can you'll get notifications in the chat of whenever I tweet something, whenever I go live on YouTube, etc. Let's see, midterms for MTG. I would love to be able to say that MTG has a chance of losing. Unfortunately, because of gerrymandering and everything, she'll probably lose. Although Cawthorn lost, he was primaried, so I'm shook. I was shook when Cawthorn lost, because he was everything that the Nazi youth in the Republican Party would love.
So Ahmad, put up your Twitter account so that people can find you on Twitter and follow you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mod.
Marcus Flowers, that's the one who's running against Marjorie Taylor Greene, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I always have. For a while there, like especially before 2016, I think it was, or maybe it was 2018. I would have this thing, where I would have on candidates who were challenging not just Republicans, but it also, sometimes even challenging like establishment Democrats. Because I have this idea that you should, that we should always be not just moving Congress to the left, but we should always be trying to move each seat to as far left as possible. So if there's like a moderate Republican in a seat, try and replace it with a centrist Democrat. If there's a centrist Democrat in a seat, try and see if you can replace it with somebody who's a more, moderate Democrat. Moderate Democrat, try and get a quote liberal in. If there's a liberal there, try to get somebody who's progressive in. Try and move everything to the left so that you can get more and more progress, and so that the average of the party and the average of Congress moves to the left as well. So therefore we can get things that we need. We can pass things that we need. But the other thing is that a lot of times we have to stop fighting a lot of the infighting as well. Because I had people on Twitter calling me Republican Dan because I'm, not as far to the left as they thought I was. Or I'm for like things like Medicare for all, universal basic income. Those are pretty progressive things to support. But because I was, trying to use facts and logic and reason to try and, talk about things, they're like, oh, well, he's a Republican. I'm like, no, the Republicans would do the exact opposite.
Right. There are people that will not like somebody like yourself or myself because we know that there has to be some level of compromise to get anything done in the existing system of government. And they think, they think that this is a pure democracy, and it's not. And so that's their problem. They expect it to be a pure democracy where somebody gets elected and they just pass whatever they want with a majority, but it doesn't work that way. You have to have a certain level of majority, especially in the Senate.
Right.
You have to, and then you have people like Manchin and Sinema who are constantly voting against their own party, mucking up the works. So,
well, I've labeled myself as a pragmatic progressive. So I also don't necessarily agree with if somebody is self-described as a leftist and you call them liberal, they'll be like, I'm not a liberal, I'm a leftist. But I don't necessarily see those separations between the two. But I do call myself a pragmatic progressive because there are things I want, but I know that you have to take steps to get there. Like, right. I like Medicare for all. I like that idea. But I was defending Joe Biden's plan during the campaign, and people like I was a Proud Socialist on Twitter and other places where you had progressive, leftist types. Why won't he support Medicare for all? Because it's popular. I was like, well, the reason is because his plan is more popular. Here's the link to Kaiser. Here, I have a video about it. Here's where I lay it out. Why would Joe Biden support something that's less popular than his own plan? It doesn't make any sense. But they just want to have their way. And that's why, places like the Young Turks will, go after Hal and go after other, liberals who are out there trying to fight against conservatism, because if they don't get their way, unfortunately, they take their ball and go home. And that might very well be why we have Trump in the first place. But they'll complain about things like the Cisneros versus Cuellar in Texas's, I think, 23rd district race, because Cuellar is a pro-life Democrat and Cisneros is a more progressive one. And if I had to pick two in a vacuum, I'd want Cisneros every day of the week. But we don't live in a vacuum, and this is a district where Cuellar did better than Biden in this conservative leading district, which makes me think that if a progressive ran, you may not have the opportunity to win. Then you lose the seat. I would I like all Democrats to be pro-choice? Absolutely. I want everybody to be pro-choice. I want everybody to support abortion rights, because abortion rights are human rights. So everybody should have the right to body autonomy. But if it's a difference between having a Democrat there to give one more vote to have a Democratic Speaker of the House, or getting a Republican in there because you let the perfect be the enemy of the good, I'm going to want the pro-choice Democrat there. It's as simple as that.
Right. So, so any more questions from the audience? Anybody got any questions? Do we ask then those questions that have nothing to do with politics?
That's fine. I'm open to that as well. I talk about many things. I sometimes go way off script on the podcast and we start talking about stuff. I mean, there was one show I did 3 hours, one show last August, almost a year ago now, where it was just my life as an obese person, going through all of the things. And it wasn't very political. There might have been some politics in there, but it was more of a view into my life. I did another more recent episode where it was like my life as somebody raised Jewish. There was a more view into my life. Let's see. Andrea says, "Will Pelosi retire? Was Schumer up to it?" Well, Schumer's in the Senate, so Pelosi retires, it wouldn't be Schumer that would take over, because Schumer's not. Schumer didn't have to be elected to the House in order to get that happen. Oh, I mean, I guess the Speaker of the House technically doesn't have to be a member of the House, because there is always that conversation of, if you have a Republican majority in the House, the Republican majority could technically name Donald Trump to be Speaker of the House. I don't think it's happened, but I think they can do that. So I don't know if you could choose Schumer at that point, even though he's a senator, to be House Speaker. That's interesting. I don't know if he'd do it, because he's, I think he's the Senate majority leader, so he probably doesn't want to jump over.
Yeah, the reason though they wanted to make Trump the Speaker of the House is the presidential succession.
Right,
so they
exactly.
were hoping to deadlock things and push it to Trump.
Right. Well, I mean, how they still wouldn't explain that way on how you get rid of Biden and Harris, because you can't remove them via impeachment, because you don't have the votes, just like we didn't have the votes to remove Trump via impeachment.
And actually, if they had decertified the election, Nancy Pelosi would now be our president. So if Pence had done what they wanted Pence to do, we would have President Pelosi right now.
Right, but don't let the facts get in the way of them stating it.
Of course, they would have to kill her, and then it would just like go down and down and down and down.
Yeah,
down.
well, I mean, maybe that's the silent part that they want to say. If Trump became Speaker of the House, maybe there would be other more aggressive and more adept folks like the January 6ers who would do the job that they would then need them to do in order for Trump to become president.
Who is the education secretary? We have to figure that out on January 6th, but whatever. Yes, they did not think that far ahead, Andrea says.
No.
But being a Battlestar Galactica fan, including the newer version of this series, you remember the educational. I said her title earlier.
Yeah, Secretary of Education.
Secretary of Education becomes president in Battlestar Galactica. So maybe they were thinking along that lines. But I thought that the Secretary of Education had already resigned, so that wouldn't work either.
what was there was another show recently where like the entirety of the government and was it the Secretary of HUD that became the president? It was on Fox for a while, then it flipped over, I think, to Netflix, and I'm forgetting the name off
Yeah,
the
that
top.
was the designated survivor or
Designated
designated
Survivor.
something.
Yes, that's the name of it. Yeah, and that would have meant Ben Carson could have become president. I'm like, ooh, no. Ben Carson. Look, I'm from Baltimore. I'd heard of Ben Carson before. You know, brilliant brain surgeon. But I think he's the type of person. He was the type of person to where, like, I work at a law firm, and a lot of these lawyers, I think, spent all of their time learning the law and none learning anything else. I think the same thing applies to Ben Carson. He filled his head with so much expertise on how to fix a brain that he doesn't know how to do anything else, and everything else just comes out stupid. So,
Andrea wants your opinion on the Ukraine-Russia war.
I, I think it's just an example of it shows how poor, how weak of a president Donald Trump was. Because when Donald Trump was president, Russia didn't have to do anything like declare war or attack anybody to gain power. Trump was ceding him power left and right. He got more power in the Middle East over the whole Syria thing. Trump worked his ass off to try and take power and influence away from NATO. So Putin loved having Donald Trump as president. Donald Trump can pretend to be all, oh, Putin would have never done this under me. Well, no, he didn't have to because you were giving him the world on a platter. So now that we have Biden in office, somebody who won't put up with Putin's BS, you now have a situation where Putin has to flex his muscles, and fortunately for the rest of the world, the muscles seem to be not too strong because Ukraine is doing a heck of a job, and I think we need to continue doing what what we've been doing in helping Ukraine out. And unfortunately, you have too many Republicans who are, to use some of the word from the modern vernacular, simps for Russia. They want us. They don't want to see Russia being weakened for whatever reason. They're complaining that we're helping Ukraine against Russia when it used to be Russia used to be the bad guy, and they should still be the bad guy. But as long as the Democrats are the bad Democrats are it's most important to make the Democrats the bad guy. So if in doing so they help back Russia and be apologists for Russia and their actions, or criticize our involvement in what's going on over there, they're going to do so.
So we have some odd questions: smooth or chunky peanut butter, and your favorite color.
I
And
typically
then
tend to
back to the heavy
I
stuff.
typically tend to buy smooth, but I don't mind chunky. Like, I'm not that picky. Like when it comes to like wings, like a lot of people there are like, some people like love flats, some people love drums. I think I like flats a little more than drums, but my wife likes the other one, so I end up usually getting more of the flats. So there's that. So I'm not too, as you can see, I'm not very picky about my food. So
So favorite color, and then the heavy question:
color.
China versus Taiwan.
Typically been blue, but there, some I have other kind of sub favorites out there. Like I also like purple. I also like green. So, but I think blue is generally the main one. China, Taiwan. I'm honestly, I think it's a situation where the Republicans will talk badly about China and about connections to China, but then when we stand up for Taiwan against China, they're like, well, why are we getting involved with that? So it's like, they have to pick they won't, their only side that they're going to pick is there. And when it comes to China and Taiwan, I'm frankly surprised that China has made a move earlier to be able to do it. I think it's more of a threat they like to hold over people's head, but I'm also not, I'm also not as educated about that problem as I probably should be, or could be at least. Let's see. Aaron says there are a lot of blues. I guess that's why they call it the blues. Aaron West and unicorns. I think Aaron West says she is a unicorn, Andrea. So I don't think there's I don't know if there's a choice there. At least that's what was said on the podcast, at least in one of the chats, I think.
Brain, a culturalization for men makes most of them pick blue as their favorite color.
Huh. I don't know. That's. I guess that's interesting.
Actually, red is my favorite color, but they kind of ruined that for me when they changed the Republican Party to red.
Yeah, and it's weird how that
current
happened,
issues with red.
because it never used to be like before 2020 or before 2000. I mean, it never was, blue or Democrats, red or Republicans. The media would just alternate. Like one year, the red would be the Republicans. One year, the blue would be the Republicans. It would be another color might be the Republicans or the Democrats. And what happened, but because we talked about the red states and the blue states so much in 2020, and it lasted through December, it just stuck. And at that point, it just stuck. And we now have red and blue, and I guess at some point purple.
I think the total irony of it is, though, because of ABC News and that voting graphic on television and the way that the red showed up and the blue didn't, because that dates back to black and white television still being a thing, because the blue didn't show up and the red did, because blue on black and white TV, blue would actually blend in with the grays. And so if you were watching the show on black and white TV, the blue wasn't really distinguishable. That's why they put the party that was leading in red, and that's why the Republicans ended up in red, and that's why it stuck. But the irony is, when you think back to the Cold War, red is the thing that you associate with communism. And
Right.
which party is communist and fascist and trying to tell you what to do now? The Republicans.
Right.
So now they're associated with a color that just basically says that,
Yeah, red were always the bad guys, and then now I guess that's still true.
I think the reason maybe why I like red is because red was the color of engineering on Star Trek. So even though the red shirt guys died, but apparently I was one of those red shirt guys that didn't die.
Right. I think there's math on it that shows that actually it wasn't really the red shirts that died the most, but it's just the perception of the red guys which it's an interesting conversation, because with perception versus reality, I did, because I have my regular podcast on YouTube, but I also have what I call the minicast. And the minicast is just minicast@liberaldan.com, and it's an anchor podcast. And it's more of a short form, and it's might be more specific to one smaller topic of discussion, and sometimes it's less political and more maybe just general talk. And the one of the things I thought about during the pandemic, we used to have a regular poker game before the pandemic started at one of my friend's house, but because we couldn't meet in person, he found a way for us to do the poker game online. And I would always, even before the pandemic, we'd be playing poker, and Texas Hold'em was the game that we would play in little homemade tournaments. And I always, if you're not familiar with Texas Hold'em, you have two cards that are dealt to everybody, and then you have the flop, the first three cards that is shared by everybody on the table. And it was my perception that I was unlucky, that I would see the flop come. I would have two clubs in my hand, and the odds, and I always perceived it that when I had two clubs in my hand, it would never come three clubs. It would always come, it might come three of some other color, or it might come a rainbow of different colors, different suits, but it would never come three clubs as often as it should. In the pandemic, since we were doing it online, I had the ability to just sit there and track my hands, and every time I had a suited hand in my whole cards, I would then see, well, what comes next, and I made an Excel spreadsheet, and it turned out that my perception was wrong. I was actually luckier than normal. I was getting three cards or two cards matching that suit more than I should have been, and not less than. But because my perception was a certain way, I was kept on thinking to myself that falsehood. And unfortunately, one of the things about growth is that once you realize that your perception is wrong, you change your worldview. And unfortunately, we have a bunch of people in this country who are unwilling to change their worldview, even if given data that proves that their perception's incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one more thing about the minicast I did want to talk about, which was I've talked about this in the podcast. I have an idea for a minicast where I want user feedback. So you can either go to liberaldan.com and find the thread, or you can leave me a voicemail message on Anchor at minicast@liberaldan.com, or you can just shoot me an email at liberaldanradio@gmail.com. And basically, is that I want to hear what people thought of when they were children, as to if they were successful. What would that mean? What would they be able to do? Maybe what would they own? What would they? What would have been okay? I'm successful, and not like a dream, like, oh, I want a Corvette when I grow up, and I get the Corvette. No, that's maybe just not the excessive type stuff, not being a billionaire, not being whatever, but anybody, just basically saying, I thought when I grew up, I want to have X, Y, and Z. And I also want to hear, did y'all get that? And what do you think about it now? Like, maybe you were thinking weird. Maybe what you thought of as a kid was impossible. Did you get that? Or does modern society make that impossible now, depending on what you thought back then? Or did you achieve your goals? Did you achieve what happened? So I have my thing. I have a couple of people who have contributed to that, but I would like to have a couple more before I produce that podcast. So minicast.liberaldan.com, or go to liberaldan.com, or email me liberaldanradio@gmail.com and give me your answers to that. And then once I get a couple more, I'll go ahead and make the podcast, or make that minicast, and I'll tweet a bit. I'll tweet about it, and it'll be something that's available as well. So,
okay, well, we got the website address up there. You can
cool.
double check that I typed it correctly.
That works. That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Really enjoyable tonight having you on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Andrea says, talk about school starting in Tuesday. We get Wednesday as our first day of school here. So part of it's good because the kids get to go back to school, but part of that means I need to wake up in the morning earlier and now take the kids to school, or I could, because I work from home, I could typically for over the summer just wake up at 8:30 and stumble into my office and then start working when I feel like working, and not have to wake up for 7 or 6:45 to get the kids to school and then come back home to go to work. So, but yeah, I think that the kids are pretty good when it comes to not being pains in our butts. They're pretty well behaved kids for the most part. I remember everyone was shocked when my grandfather passed away a few years back, and we went up for the funeral, and everyone was commenting about how well behaved the kids were and how they didn't. They were shocked how they just sat there and well behaved. So I think we're raising good kids. You have your problems, whatever, but I'm a proud dad. I love my boys. So I do have a teenagers. I have a 13-year-old right now. So he has gotten a little more mouthy than normal than he had been. So that could be his teenageness. But there are some things still about him that kind of are endearing and very young, childlike. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm definitely interested to see how his teenage years turn out, because I thought I was a good teenager, but I don't know. Who knows? You have to talk to my mom about that.
Okay, so I think we've pretty much exhausted the topics tonight. How about you all out there in chat?
Probably. I mean, again, I'm welcome to. I wonder what Erin is thinking about with her face. But yeah,
you want to answer that question, Erin? Andrea says she has a 13 and 15-year-old in the house.
Yeah, I have a 9 and a 13-year-old. So I guess when he becomes 17 and is a senior, he'll then be, the other one will be 13 and about to go to high school. But I won't have two high schoolers at the same time. Like when the youngest one will go into high school. The other one will be in college. So yeah, Taz is. Aaron was listening while we were on Twitch, twitch.tv/nerdydan.com. That's my other website, is nerdydan.com. And when he wins a match, or if he loses a match and he gets upset, he can be a little bit loud when it comes to that. And it's Nerdy Dan. The website is nerdydan.com, but the username is Nerdy Dan, DOTCOM, on Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube as well. So that's another thing.
Nerdy Dan, DOTC.
DOTCOM as the username, but it's nerdydan.com as the website. Yeah, so you're basically spelling out the .com part instead of writing out the period. But yeah, that's correct. So and it's weird because Twitch is another one of those things where getting the point where you become an affiliate is more difficult than one might think. You have to already have 60 subs on, or 60 followers on Twitch, but you need to have an average of 3 listeners an hour, and I haven't quite gotten there yet. Maybe if I have a more regular streaming schedule, I will. I'm also thinking of kind of merging the two and having nerdydan.com be like a project of Liberal Dan Radio or of liberaldan.com, and maybe discussing more political stuff whilst gaming. And maybe that's a good way to go, because maybe that'll make me more of a niche, which might attract more people instead of just being a generic gamer. So but I'm also looking for new games to play. So if anyone wants to play a game online with me, or be it any sort of shooting type game or anything else for that matter, I'm always open to suggestions. So but yeah.
We need Jim to answer why his school start changes to his business season?
How about Jim? Do you do are you an ice cream delivery driver, or what? Like, I'm trying to figure out what that would be. Maybe working at a pool, working at a camp. What are the guesses? Trying to think about the guesses that might be.
Well, it could be managing like a hotel or something that people only come to during the summer or something.
My kids do, but we had to get a deal on some sort of bouncy type house, where like bouncy place where like you have a lot of indoor trampoline park, and they've been going to that a lot during the summer. So that could be another thing. That's summer. The Twitch is glitching, so just call it glitch, I guess, at that point. Sell record keeping materials to schools. They stock up in the summer. Huh? There you go. So it's not kid related. It's just school related when they stock up. I mean, do you sell it? Maybe if you sell it, if you happen to sell enough record keeping materials to last you throughout the entire year, then maybe that could be potentially a good thing. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case or not, but if you could do like the revert, like make enough money, I would love to be able to make enough money to over 3 months to last for a whole year. That'd be wonderful. I don't know if that's the case for many people. I don't know if that's the case for Jim, but that would be a dream. Actually, no, the dream is just doing this full time and getting enough supporters so that I can continue to do it. But I have to definitely be making more money than what I make at my software or at my IT job. And as I advance in my career, it makes it harder and harder for me to hit that point with the podcast, because as your salary grows, it's more to keep up with. So
now we have viewers asking viewers questions. So
yeah.
Maybe it's time to end the podcast. The host here would like to.
Well, the host, you're in control, so you get to. I mean, there are some times where I'm like, where I'll be like, I'd like to end the podcast, but I'll keep it going because the listeners are still talking and still asking questions. But hey, you're in control, so if you want to end the podcast,
Andrea wants you to know that next time she'll be on, but tonight, of course, with her doing double duty as a mod and having to be here is just too much to, try to be in both. She couldn't possibly be in both, and would be a conflict of interest for her to be on tonight too. So
understanding. That's fine, and I appreciate that those, like Aaron mods for me. And
we knew this though. We knew this starting the podcast that that there would always be nights where she couldn't be on for one reason or another, either
Right.
because of her modding duties or because of uh, sometimes things that were going on with her day-to-day job. So yeah, there was always that thing. And she
Well, I
says
mean,
Trump's rallies suck.
I'm sure it does. Aaron said she has lots
Aaron
of,
says I have
yeah.
lots of silly questions.
And look, and if you think of any other questions for me, or if you think of any other, or if you have silly questions you want me to answer, again, minicast@liberaldan.com. You can leave a voicemail there. You can ask me whatever questions you want to ask, and I'll be more than happy to answer them in the podcast as long as they're, I guess, kosher to answer that way. We'll see. Maybe some things might, probably people like Dan. Jim says probably people like Dan ruining my business. Although it's interesting, I used to think that as I was going into software development and thinking about computers, that computers would make us use less paper, and technology for at least for a while made it possible for us to print out more reports more quickly. I used to work at a hospital. I think it's Apple TV that has a show called Memorial, which is about Memorial Medical Center, where there are several deaths happened during Katrina. There was conversations about whether or not they were doing just off, like letting the people die, or giving them extra morphine to whatever. But that's the hospital that I worked at. They got national attention. That's the hospital I worked at prior to Katrina, and part of my job was printing out like stacks of reports like this big and then walking them all around the hospital. So
So Andrea has a question, and I have to read this in a different voice. What do you think about Alex Jones' trial?
well, do too much Alex Jones, you can hurt your throat. But I love the fact that his lawyers screwed him. I love the fact that his lawyers showed that he perjured himself. I mean, I guess he tried to get around with saying, I believed it was true at the time. But I hope they take him for every single penny that he has, because I mean, I hope that he's not able to hide things in the various corporations that he has, because apparently he has a large bunch of them. I think he tries to use them to I guess shield some of his earnings for any, as any rich person does that, to try and shield their earnings from and keep them from being taken away in lawsuits. But it's I'm glad to see that he's getting repercussions for what he said, because free speech rights doesn't give you the ability to slander people, to libel people. It doesn't give you the ability to, you don't have the right to cause people harm. And these people got threats and phone calls because they were incited by Jones to think that they were crisis actors or whatever else you wanted to call them. And so yeah, I hope they take him for every penny that he has. I hope that they're able to, that's never going to replace the loss of their kids, but it'll still punish him for, and maybe make other people think twice before they start thinking that they can get away with such crap. So
Andrea says, and the porn on his phone wasn't his. Yeah, right.
right.
Jim says free speech carries responsibility for your words.
Yep.
And then Andrea says he still has more Sandy Hook families to go for trials. Yep.
And that's why I think he has a worth of several hundred million. I think was what his worth was put at, and I hope the families get together and just take every penny. I hope. I wish nothing but the worst for the guy.
Yeah. And when you talk the way he does, and you bend the truth the way he does with his lies, and just generally insult people that way, it's just something that you should pay for.
But he's also responsible, I think, for riling people up for January 6th. I think that maybe after they take all of those funds, maybe then hopefully at that point, maybe the Justice Department will go after him too as one of the co-conspirators for somebody who has encouraged others, incited others to act violently against government. I think he is spoke out in support of those things, and if they find it that he did so in a criminal way, I hope he gets locked up for a long time too, because he has actively worked to convince these people that the things he says are right, and even though often they're not, and without any thoughts to the real world harm that he does both to the individuals that he's talking about and to the country. So he's not a patriot. A lot of these people like to call themselves patriots and wrap themselves with the flags, but they're not. They're faux patriots. They're cosplay patriots, if you will. You know, they like to dress up and pretend to be, but they don't. They hate this country. They hate everything that we're supposed to stand for, and while flying around the Confederate flag.
Mhm. Well, the audience would like me to stay here for the whole night. And so, and Aaron says, what's glitching over on Twitch? I don't know. I'd have to look at Twitch. I'm not sure why Twitch is glitching. See if I can look at that. I don't know that there's any way that I can restart it either. So I don't think there's. I don't know whether that would. I don't know if that would do the thing, like stop it and restart it. See, I can make it stop,
Right.
but I don't think I can kick it back in.
I haven't worked too much with streaming outside of OBS to one place, let alone several. I still have to figure out which platform I want to use if I want to
I
start.
don't know if that
places.
would make it work or not. That might have
Yeah.
killed it entirely. And I'd be
We'll see
lucky if it didn't mess everything else up too.
We'll see if Aaron hops back on YouTube instead of on Twitch.
And I'm not seeing my stream up on Twitch anyway, because apparently I'm not following myself, which I should be. I'm seeing somebody else's stream up there. So I don't know if that fixed it or made it worse. Let's just see if I can even see it. I killed Twitch. Yeah, I figured I did.
Wah wah. Jim had said something about, wasn't there a law from 45 administration that holds accountable liable for actions of their supporters? And yeah, according to this article on this website, Trump's order to punish BLM protesters may result in 10-year sentences for Capitol rioters.
So it did start a new stream on Twitch. So if you go back there, you can probably look at it.
Yeah, apparently the people who invaded and the insurrectionists could be punished by Trump's own order to punish Black Lives Matter and Antifa folks, which that would be just the purest form of irony. It would be delicious irony. I would love to see them punished under something that Trump did. That would just be perfect. A perfect end, if you will.
So my stream was restarted, but I don't know whether people that were trying to watch over there were able to use it.
Yeah, it looks
Okay,
like
she
Aaron's
says
back
it's
on.
good.
Yep. Although right as we're about to end, right?
Well, as we're trying to end, the host
Right.
is tired because the host had a rough night last night with the lack of air conditioning. So
Oof, I'm sorry. I've
got
living
it
in New
fixed today,
Orleans.
though.
Living in New Orleans, we have dealt with that before. I had to run in and get three fans just to be able to blow in those fans around just so we can have some semblance of coolness while we're waiting. But yeah, the damn South with AC sucking, it's never good. Let's see what happens with senators that were involved with J6. The senators and congressmen, I hope they get thrown up the river without a paddle either. Even if, as Jim says, voters would have to take care of them, but I mean, Will they? I don't know if the voters will hold them accountable. If they do, great. But even if the voters kick him out of office for their complicity in what happened with J6, I we still they should if they're complicit in what happened, they should absolutely be punished. And I hope Garland has them in his sights as well. So
Until she stayed in the hotel because it was hot in her apartment. I responded back. I thought about doing that. If it had been anything more than a capacitor failure, I would have.
yeah, there are times when we've been hot, and either we sent the kids or even my wife to my mother-in-law's house, which is just around the corner, and or have done other things, like went and stayed at a hotel or something, because yeah, it's just unbearable. And of course, the AC always goes out in the middle of summer, and the heat goes out in the middle of winter. Although in New Orleans, the middle of winter can sometimes be just 2-3 weeks. So I think there may be laws on potentially people running for office that are felons in maybe if it's in the House. I don't know. I don't know if the same thing applies as president, but hopefully, I know if you impeach a president, you can then make the choice to make them no longer be able to hold office in the future, at least federally. So maybe the same thing can happen if they're convicted. But hey, if they're convicted for if they're convicted for treason and sedition or whatever, they maybe they'll just be locked up for so long that'll be their permanent residence, and that would be good too.
Mm-hmm. And Ahmad put up the thing to get people to check whether they're able to vote, so that you can do that. If you don't know how to go to your local supervisor of elections, go to this website, www.vote.org. So we want to recommend that for people to do, so that they vote this time around and every time around, and make sure that they're still registered to vote. They can check and find out whether they're registered to vote. So,
because that's one of the terrible things that happened in Florida in 2000 was people were kicked off the voter rolls, but they weren't really notified, and the state's not required to make sure that they're told that they can't vote. And before 2000, I mean, you didn't have provisional ballots. So if you showed up to vote and you didn't have the right to vote, because they did cast a wide net and cause a lot of people to be prevented from voting, that you just couldn't vote. And it was one of the ways that the Republicans in Florida stole that election. So
mm-hmm. Okay. You guys ready to go yet?
I'm ready to finish if you are. I can go have a snack or something, finish up if there's anything else for dinner, because I don't know if the 3 tacos were enough. So
I think we talked about pretty much everything. We certainly like to have you back at some point, Liberal Dan.
Absolutely,
it's been
anytime.
a great show with you on it tonight. And
yeah, be more
we'll
than happy
to chat with the people in the chat room as we find the outro for the show. So yes, please do come back again.
Yeah, anytime. Whatever you want. Okay. I'll be more than happy to, as long as I'm not on vacation.
Okay, so you can chat in the chat room, and when this video plays, you can't be on camera or microphone. So any last words?
Again, liberaldan.com, nerdydan.com for my gaming stuff. Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Central. YouTube.com/liberaldanradio. At least an hour a week, maybe more. At the very least, share some videos and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not already done so, because again, trying to hit 1,000 subs. And I'll definitely, as part of my links of the week, I'll definitely make this the first links of the week. So I'll share this channel as well on my podcast. I'll hopefully can put some subscribers over to you as well. So
all right, thank you so much. Thank you for being on Freedom Speech and You. And next week we'll have Andrea back if Hal doesn't schedule a stream at the same time. We'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.
Have a good one.